I think what inspired me to write the book was just something that I noticed over my years of covering business and economics, namely that I was not talking to a lot of women.
Hello, I'm Bonnie Urbay. Welcome to the Contrary, a discussion of news and social issues from diverse perspectives. This week, we continue our Women Thought Leader series with NPR's host of the podcast, The Indicator from Planet Money, and author of Machiavelli for Women. Stacey Vanek Smith is a veteran reporter for public radio and has focused on issues regarding business economics and related areas. Thank you for joining us today, and welcome, Stacey.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
Well, we're thrilled to have you.
First, tell our audience, if you would, about your career at NPR and your podcast.
Yes, absolutely. So I've been working in public radio for about 15 years. The whole time covering business and economics, pretty much. I worked for Marketplace for a little over a decade, and then I went to NPR, where I've worked for Planet Money, which is a podcast about business and economics. And then about 3 years ago, I helped to start a spinoff of Planet Money, a daily podcast called Planet Money Indicator, all dealing with business and economics and all the issues related to that and to money. I've definitely been a generalist in the realm of business and economics. So yes, have definitely covered the stock market, unemployment numbers, everything from the housing crisis, quantitative easing, the COVID pandemic. So try to take a very holistic view of the economy and money, basically anything money I have license to cover. So also personal finance as well.
Tell us about what you've learned, since obviously you're a young woman coming up in the public broadcasting arena and covering these issues from an economic perspective. What has that taught you about women and money?
Well, the main thing it taught me is that women seem to be shut out of money in a lot of ways. One thing you learn when you cover business and economics is that you talk to a lot of men. Luckily, I love talking to men. I love talking to economists. But it's really surprising that economics is almost 80% male still. Most people working in banking and finance are men. Women do start 40% of businesses in the country, but they about 2% of venture capital. So most business leaders, most CEOs are men. So that is the thing that I think initially inspired me to start looking into this topic, was that I just wasn't seeing a lot of women or a lot of people of color in positions of leadership in business or in economics. And of course, this is because of messages that women and minorities get about money. And I think it's all quite interrelated, but money and access to money and the ability to talk about money in business, I think it's crucially important.
Why did you focus on women and Machiavelli in your book? What does Niccolò Machiavelli have to say to women these days?
It's an excellent question. People are often very surprised. Machiavelli was not a feminist in any way, shape, or form. But Machiavelli's advice for leadership and attaining power does have a really timeless element, which is why we've been going back to him for 500 years. And The Prince, Machiavelli's most famous work, was written from the perspective of Machiavelli was essentially sort of the Secretary of State for Florence. That was his job. And he writes it to the quote unquote conquering prince. So he says there are two kinds of princes that exist. There's the inheriting prince who's gotten his kingdom from his family, and the conquering prince who's won a new land. And Machiavelli makes the point that for the conquering prince, things are very hard. Power's new and unstable. A lot of people are challenging him. He's a newcomer, an outsider. It's actually an excellent proxy for women and other marginalized workers. People are new to power. A lot of people are in the workplace, in new fields, but when it comes to actually getting positions of leadership or excelling in those fields, that gets a lot more difficult. when I started covering things like the gender pay gap, the gender promotion gap, and women trying to get venture capital and things like that, I started to see a pattern. And I think I became frustrated with how slow some of the progress was. Some of the progress is so stunning and exciting and inspiring. And in some ways, women are just stuck in the US economy.
And tell me, what's causing them to be stuck in the areas where they are? I mean, first of all, the pandemic obviously has not been good for women.
Yes, exactly. No one exactly knows why we're stuck. Economists have all kinds of theories, but the gender pay gap, for instance, has not moved in a decade. So it's been stuck for 10 years. Women make about 80 cents on the dollar. For what a man makes for Black women, it's about 63 cents on the dollar. And for Native and Latina women, it's about 55 cents. And those numbers have just been static. A lot of statistics about women in the workplace have been static. And during the pandemic, it got worse. Women lost about 30 years of progress in the workplace during the pandemic. A lot of women dropped out to work from home and things like that. So it's just mystifying why the progress has kind of stopped in this area, and in some cases moved backwards a little bit. Women and minorities got a smaller share of venture capital last year than they had before, which was already pretty tiny. So it does seem like in certain ways, we're just not moving forward at the rate we should be.
Well, but do you think that has to do with what a lot of the feminist leaders would say is access to childcare? And so women have to drop out when they have kids, which I always thought the cure to that problem would be that they would make their partners do half the work. And at least then you needed less daycare because one parent would be around while the other was working and vice versa.
Yes, childcare is, I think, the big kahuna here. It's responsible for, I think, a lot of the pay gap, a lot of the promotion gap, a lot of the lack of women in leadership positions. Women make all kinds of decisions based on accommodating childcare. And certainly that is probably the biggest issue facing women in the workplace still. And as you say, there has been a lot of progress with partners and men helping out a lot more with childcare duties. But we know from surveys and statistics that women still do the vast majority of childcare and of housework. It just falls on them. And that stayed true during the pandemic. So helping women with these issues and solving them is absolutely key to helping women advance in the economy and close some of these gaps that have been stuck for so long.
Let's get back to your book about Machiavelli and women. What would Machiavelli tell women, or what was his message from the prince about dropping out of the workforce to stay home, or taking a lesser job that can be where you can telecommute in order to care for the children?
Well, Machiavelli was first and foremost a huge advocate of seeing the situation clearly. I think that is his greatest strength, and the most wisdom he offers is in this area. To look at the situation you're in with no filter. And a lot of times things aren't the way that they should be. A lot of times things are unfair, and workplace situations are difficult and unfair in ways they shouldn't be. What Machiavelli advocated was just looking right at the situation, assessing it, and figuring out what you can do and where you can find your advantages. So I think for women juggling childcare, Machiavelli would say, look at your own workplace situation. What exactly do you need to do your best work? And ask for that. And I think it will differ depending on workplaces. And I think for employers right now, they're very hungry for workers. So I do think right now offers an extraordinary opportunity to women to ask for what they need. So think about exactly what you need to make your workplace situation most advantageous for you so you can do your best work, and ask exactly for that.
But how is that? That sounds like very practical advice, but it wouldn't be different for one gender versus the other necessarily. Or what am I missing?
Well, that is very true. And practical advice was big for Machiavelli. For women, though, asking for things tends to be trickier. For men, it's it can be much simpler to be assertive and to ask for things directly or even aggressively and say, like, if you don't give me a $20,000 raise, I'll quit. For women, that is processed very differently. And this comes from a lot of research. When women ask for things aggressively or assertively, it's just perceived in a different way. People will often have negative takeaways from women who ask for things. They will be assumed to be selfish or aggressive or not easy to work with. They'll often be held back from projects or advancement because they're considered difficult. So when you're a woman and you're asking for things, you have to walk a little bit of a fine line where you're asking for something, but you're asking in a way that's not too aggressive or assertive. You're asking in a way that is most likely to get you what you want.
And how do you do that ask? How do you counsel women in the book to do that ask, make that ask?
It depends on what you're doing, but for asking for a raise, let's say, or a different workplace situation, what I recommend is that women go into a negotiation looking at it like a collaboration. You are collaborating with your workplace. This is your partner. And in a lot of ways, that's exactly what it is. Your workplace gives you things and you give your workplace things. So to go in and paint a picture of where you want to go at this company, the opportunities that you're excited about and what you have to offer the company. Think about what they want. Also think about what you want and paint a picture of the sort of wonderful collaboration you can have going forward at this company, and present that vision, and then ask for what you need in order, say, listen, I'm so excited about where I'm going here. I really believe in this company's mission. I think I can greatly contribute to this. And I know that you're wanting to move more in this direction and that direction. And I truly believe I can help with that. I do know from my market research that the salary range for this position tends to be between $70,000 and $90,000. I know I'm not making in that range. And it's very important for me to feel like the work that I'm doing is recognized and valued. So I'd like to talk about salary as well, but I'm just really excited to be moving forward with this company. So it's less of a sort of mano a mano situation and more of a better together situation.
And why is it that you think, well, what is it? I mean, the main difference between men and women is hormones, at least in terms of our physiology and our systems. What is it about more estrogen and less testosterone that makes women less able to make those kinds of asks?
That's a great question. Research does show that women ask for raises, ask for things at work about 1/5 as much as men do. But there are a lot of reasons for this. Part of it is that women can often be punished for asking, and in a way that men aren't. So I think a lot of what keeps women from asking is wisdom in a certain way, Machiavellian wisdom, that if they ask, things could go awry. So they don't ask. The upside is uncertain. Women tend to be less successful in negotiations than men are. And the downside is pretty certain. You'll be thought of as less pleasant to work with. Women who ask for more money in a job negotiation are considered less desirable to work with. And it doesn't matter how they ask. So I think women are looking at the situation and making a call. And then in a very strange turn of events, also blaming themselves for the situation. Why am I not asking for more? I certainly have been there. Why am I not getting paid more? Why can't I go in and ask for a raise? What's wrong with me? So women are in a situation where they're punished for asking, and then they punish themselves for not asking. It can be really difficult. But I think the truth is women are just in a difficult situation when they're asking for more. And so I'm hoping in my book to give women some tools to find ways to ask for more with minimizing the downside and hopefully getting to where things are more equal.
I was just chuckling before, not because what you're saying is funny, but because it rang so true with me earlier on in my career. I would have, you'd sort of have two voices in your head going back and forth, and one saying, be pushy, be like the guys, and the other one saying, no, if you do that, this will happen and that'll be bad and blah, 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 blah. I guess men just don't have that filter.
I think they don't have to have it. because when men ask for more, people often admire the man. Even if he doesn't get what he's asking for, it's sort of in line with traits we associate with masculinity: being assertive, being independent, not caring too much what other people think, being being aggressive. Those are traits that we like to see in men as a society. In women, women are supposed to be self-effacing, nurturing, compassionate, not asking for oneself. So when women do ask for more, when women do assert themselves, it can strike people in a funny way, even if they don't want to feel that way. It's just cultural things that we've taken in. So people will have a reaction like, I don't know, like she just seems kind of grabby. Where they won't have that with the man. Well, good for him. He's just, he's trying to get his. Good for him.
I've heard a lot of this, having had this show on public TV now for 30 seasons. These things are not new. What's it going to take to change this?
This is very true. I think what it's going to take is twofold. One, I think a lot of the change has to come probably at like a company and a policy level. And that's always what I've read in business and economics. But it always frustrated me a little bit because what do you do if your company doesn't have these policies in place? What do you do before policy action is taken? So there are some things that people can do on an individual level to move the needle on these things. And, there has been enormous progress. It's important to see that progress. And I think little by little, things are changing enormously, but I think it just takes time and probably policy. But from an individual level, I think there are things people can do in their own situations to make them better and to get what they need.
Well, it sounds like when you are asking for yourself, you kind of present it as, this is for us. If we move forward with a raise for me, we will come up, meaning I will do all this for you. And I want to talk about women in power because you talk about it in the book, obviously. But do you think the advice you're offering now is an extension of what Sheryl Sandberg talked about in Lean In?
Very much so, I think. Very much so. I think the idea of women asking for more and pushing in their jobs is extremely important. So yes, I do think it's in certain ways an extension of leaning in. I also think that some of the advice in Lean In can be a little it can be a little difficult if you're a woman in the workplace to just completely commit to work without balancing things the way that you need to be balanced. I'm not sure it's always realistic for women to lean in. I think a lot of women are in situations where they can't lean in.
That was going to be my next question, which is, did women following that book, the release of that book, lean in, or was it really just written to Ivy League executive women and not to the vast majority of women in the workplace?
I think there are elements of both. I definitely think there's advice in there and messages in there that do speak to all women. And one of the most powerful lessons from Lean In is, I still remember the statistic because I remember reading it so clearly, was a study of when women ask for promotions, and that men statistically would ask for promotions when they had 60% of required credentials for a job, and women would wait until they had 100%. And I think knowing things like that is very powerful, no matter what your situation is. But yes, a lot of women do have circumstances that make it difficult to completely commit to work. They can't just choose exactly what they want to do. A lot of women are in situations where they're choosing between two things that may be more difficult. So I do think that advice is maybe a little bit particular in certain ways, but it's also a very powerful book. There were a lot of really interesting messages in there. So I do generally like the book, but I also felt that it wasn't maybe speaking to everyone, and some of the advice seemed a little unrealistic to me anyway.
Let's get back to the women I was talking about now. The women, the vast majority of women in the workforce are, as you put it, making a whole lot less than the vast majority of men. And also a lot of them retail clerks, retail saleswomen, waitresses at restaurants or wait staff. A lot of them have jobs where they don't have the luxury of telecommuting. What do you say to those women, and particularly within the context of the pandemic that we seem, at least at this point in time, we seem to be heading back into?
That's very true. I would say to those women that right now is an amazing opportunity, because those are the exact jobs, service jobs, which tend to be disproportionately women, are jobs that are just incredibly in demand. Employers are desperate for workers. They're desperate to have workers not leave, and they're desperate to fill positions that they have. So workers are getting raises, promotions, bonuses. This is a really good time to ask, because workers have a lot of power right now, especially in the service sector, which is really desperate for workers. So a lot of these women are in an excellent position to ask for things, also to apply for other jobs. That can be a really powerful way to get a raise too, is to go to another company or to apply for a promotion within a company. People are more willing to promote because they just need to fill positions. And when you get one raise, that stays with you for your career. If you fight for one raise, let's say you get $10,000 more dollars, that puts you on a different platform for your next raise, your next bonus, things like that.
Is it true that through the pandemic and up to this point, women still have the advantage? Or a lot of people think a recession is maybe down the road for us a little bit, or the Delta variant has already started to shut down a lot of social interaction. And of course, that was the opening up restaurants again, getting customers, et cetera, et cetera. What was turning around the economy? Is the economy still turning around from your perspective and from what you hear? And or are women risking a little too much by asking for what they deserve?
Worries about that is a lot of what can hold women back from asking for raises. Like, what happens if times are bad and suddenly I'm expensive? Does that expose me? About the economy, there's just so much uncertainty right now. Every time it seems like we've got a stable path ahead, things change. So I would say we just don't know what's going to happen for the economy. It's on a growth trajectory right now. Things look good right now. That, of course, could change. One important thing to remember is that costing less doesn't always make you safe. People are a little bit basic when it comes to money. It's like shockingly so. So if someone gets paid more, people will often think they're just more valuable, that the work they do is better. And if someone gets paid less or has a lower title, people will tend to assume, oh, they must not be that good. Wow, why is she only getting paid X amount after working at that company for so long? She must not be so great. Or, wow, she's certainly getting paid a lot of money. She must be really good. I wish it weren't that way, because those things don't always correlate. But I think it's important to know that getting paid less doesn't keep you safe. And because there's just so much uncertainty right now and we really don't know where things are headed, I think it's an especially important moment to make an ask and to step forward and to think about what you need in the workplace and to try to make as much of it happen as you can.
You talk in the book about women-only workspaces. What's happening with them? That seemed to be, several years prior to the pandemic, obviously, but it seemed to be an important boiler room, if you will, where women could go by themselves and talk about all these issues we're discussing right now. And is it still helping women? Is it still needed?
I do think it's still needed. I think there has to be a balance. Certainly, we need everybody in on this conversation in order for things to change. It can't be an exclusionary conversation. At the same time, like you say, I think it can be very empowering for women or minorities or other marginalized workers to come together and share stories, collaborate, figure things out. I think there's enormous strength that can come with that, and problem solving, and also banding together and helping each other out. I think that is a really powerful thing that can happen in women-only spaces and other spaces where smaller groups or marginalized groups can get together. Ultimately, I think we do have to bring everyone in. That's the goal. But I think those spaces can be very powerful, yes.
Thank you so much for your time, Stacey. This has been very enlightening. That's it for this edition of To the Contrary. Let's continue the conversation on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and our website, www.tothecontrary.org. And if you agree or think to the contrary, please join us next time.
Funding for To the Contrary provided by the E. Rhodes and Leona B. Carpenter Foundation, the Colcom Foundation, and the Charles A. Freoff Foundation. For a transcript or to see an online version of this episode of To the Contrary, please visit our PBS website at pbs.org/To the Contrary.
Be more. PBS.